Today's webinar, Digital Blindspots, a Q&A on common marketing analytics hurdles, will be presented by Ben Magnuson and myself, Olivia Koivisto. I'm going to start off with telling you guys a little bit more about Ben. He is the Senior Data Strategist at One North, and he supports clients by applying a strong data focus on marketing initiatives across channels and tools. Digital marketing tools produce vast quantities of raw data, but often little direction on how to apply an effective digital strategy. So Ben partners with our clients to streamline and optimize this process, focusing on the creation of meaningful feedback loops to help support and steer decision-making. Now, a little bit about me. My name is Olivia Koivisto. I am the marketing coordinator at One North. I work closely with experience design, technology, and the digital strategy teams to develop strategic content and marketing campaigns to enrich One North's messaging and brand voice. I'm a part of a lean, mean team of 3 at our agency, so you name the marketing activity and we've probably done it. I really wanted to give some background on me to give you guys some context for why we're doing this presentation. I think it's important to recognize that we as marketers have to wear a lot of hats, and so trying to prioritize projects can be difficult. One of those projects that tends to fall on the wayside for me and our team at least has been using data and analytics and reporting on our activities in a streamlined and processed way. So with that, I kind of wanted to talk through how we got here. I began 2018 with a particular goal. I wanted our team to start creating quarterly reports on our marketing activities. You know, we've had a lot of data kind of available to us. We have all of these tools, but we've never really created a process or really shared the data that we've had in a way that was consumable for leadership, for ourselves, and for other members of our teams. So the reason I wanted to do this was to kind of show the business what our team is doing. I don't know about you guys, but sometimes it feels like everyone assumes the marketing team makes brochures, and that's about it. So this was a great way to kind of share our actual activities and how there's measurable results, and it makes a difference for the company. Another reason I wanted to get this report out was to really start learning about our audiences and our activities. Analytics give insights into this, and by creating a process for it, we were able to do it more consistently. And basically all of that is to make us better. We're trying to improve our marketing activities and get more sophisticated, and so this is really where this came out of. So I was very gung-ho, very excited to get this project started in January. So I started collecting data, reading up on tools, figuring out how we were going to create this report. And as I was going through it, I started to have questions, and then I had more questions, and then I had more questions. And I kind of felt like I wasn't totally sure where to go next, how to get started and really have a concrete beginning to this project. So like any good marketer, I started doing my research, and I found that a lot of people feel the same. There is a ton of information out there on how to start a Google Analytics project, how to be data-driven, what quarterly reports should or could look like. And so as I was doing this research, it was very helpful, but there were just kind of really off or particular questions I had as I was going through the process. Luckily, I have a handy-dandy data strategist that sits right near me who I could bother all the time, Ben, who had all the answers. And so as we were going through this process, we kind of were discussing these questions and realized that it might be helpful to share my experience and go through some things that Ben has heard from clients. So we kind of put questions out there and requested wanting to hear from you guys. So a lot of the stuff we're going to go through today is stuff that I came across. It's questions we got on Twitter or when you guys registered for this specific webinar, things clients have been telling us. And so I think Ben will do a really great job of, you know, introducing how to get started with analytics, but also some in-the-weeds stuff that'll give you some pretty great learning lessons. With that very long-winded introduction, I'd like to pass over the mic to Ben.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Magnuson. Olivia thought she was embarrassing me with the previous slide, but I actually thought the image could be bigger, and it wasn't big enough. So where to start? I'll actually start with myself. So my background prior to Groupon was actually working in product development. And in that setting, we actually used data consistently for almost every decision. It didn't necessarily drive the decision, but we always made sure we had it available. And when I moved to One North, I actually started in an account role. And I was struck by the consistency where there were times where the marketers I was working with were getting a lot of feedback internally on things they needed to change, pressing questions on where they should move with their strategy, with specific tactics that we struggled to actually bring in analytics for. They didn't have it available. If they had it, they didn't know where to get it, and consistently felt like setting something up was going to be a long and laborious process. And that was one of the main reasons why I became a data strategist. It's actually like not at all about me having all the answers. It's about working with the marketers that I do to make sure that they can get that process set without needing to add headcount or anything like that. So one of the main things that I harp on and I always run into is that in contrast to a lot of the thought leadership around analytics, the really cool stuff that comes out is there's unfortunately no silver bullet that one activity that you bring in and decides what your strategy is going to be. But that's okay, because the real benefit that you get is when it starts becoming just a part of a natural extension of your day-to-day decision-making. So when we looked and analyzed at a lot of the questions that came in, they fit really neatly into the three activities that I think are part of this process anyways, in the buckets that I normally run into when I start setting out my own analysis. So the first one is define, and they move sort of seamlessly into the next, analyze and report. So I'm going to be walking through each of these, but the main point is before you even start to analyze, you need to decide what you're going to do and what you want to discover. Analyzing is when you're actually looking at the numbers, and then with reporting, we're going to actually focus on taking the numbers that you get and how you communicate them to a broader audience, one outside maybe your marketing team, but also within your marketing team. And the cool thing is when you start to go through these steps and you actually define what you want, analyze them, and then report them to others, you start to get into that cycle that becomes more natural, that doesn't become a separate team that you need, a separate process that you need. But once you start to get that first actionable data, it will move you into this momentum where you'll use it to improve. You'll need to make sure that that improvement worked. And then as you analyze the improvement, you'll start to find different ways to move. And this starts to enhance your strategy, but it will not define your strategy. You're going to be using the same tools that you're all familiar with for that. So first, we're going to look at some of the questions that I would put in our define phase. So the first one we got was, how do I know, or the first one that we're going to cover is, how do I know I'm collecting the right data? I really like this question because it's, I can answer in a couple different ways, but it kind of fits that first thought that you have when you're like, oh man, I don't know where to start, right? So the first way that I like to think about this is, am I collecting the right data, right? You need to define what the right data is going to be first. So before any activity that I start, any analysis of either a web page, a website, a campaign, a landing page, any of that, I ask myself, what does performing well look like, right? What do I want the users that are going to act with this to do? And what are successful activities? What are just interesting activities? What are contextual activities? I write down all those questions in, just as I said, right? I'm not going to say, well, what is the bounce rate? It's how many users viewed the whole page, right? How many users actually went on to click and view a white paper? How many went on to click and subscribe? I asked myself the questions that I would actually communicate to others around me, and it helps focus what metrics I would need after that. So write your questions down. I actually like to go to the actual page that I'm analyzing, or whatever the case may be, but actually walk through it and say, what's valuable to me? Setting hypotheses is really helpful to me for when you get to the analyze phase. These do not need to be that informed. You can really just give your gut impression about how things are going to go, because those can be really interesting surprises that might indicate to you what are some of the main takeaways to focus on. Because sometimes when you start looking at the data, you already start to be familiar with it and forget the way you felt before you started diving in. And outside of maybe a specific bit of analysis, but you should also set goals and expectations before you ever start a program, right? Actually set some numbers, set some targets that you want to get to, because it's unlikely that you're there to start with. So it's about incremental improvement. You know, it's less about that dramatic 20 to 30% growth. So this is an example. This is like actually a slide that I would work with, right? So my analysis questions: how many visitors are clicking the subscribe button? Are users reading the content or dropping off right away? Notice, again, I'm not saying what's exit percentage, what's bounce rate, what are the specific metrics I want to look like. I'm going to let the questions that I have inform which metrics are going to be important, so I don't get overwhelmed with the hundreds that are going to be available to me. And then these hypotheses, right, 60% or more, 3% or more new visitors. Based on what I think is going to be important, I'm just going to set some guesses on how I think it's performing to ground the analysis later.
I think as I was going through and asking these questions for myself and trying to identify which data I wanted to pull, I found it both useful and not useful to look at benchmarking data. Here's why. So we use HubSpot as our marketing automation technology, and they are like a content machine. They're very big into inbound, and so like they have a lot of resources for marketers like me. Part of that resource is training, and one benchmark that they set when we're building out workflows or email open rates is a 20% conversion rate kind of across the board. That's the expected goal that you're supposed to hit according to HubSpot. If you're like me, you might get a little nervous when you hear that, because the nature of professional services is so different from a commerce site in terms of getting those websites turned on or getting those conversions that you'd like. So when you're looking at that benchmark data, it can be really informative and help give you background onto making educated guesses. But you can also recognize that your industry might be different than what's kind of out there in literature, and it's okay. You don't have to be totally right. Having those conversational goals or questions in mind will really help you stay grounded in what you're doing. That's what helped me a lot.
That's a great point. And one thing that benchmarking data is great. It's helpful to know where you are compared to others if you can get a good definition of who the others are. I use benchmark data a lot when I'm trying to make a business case for something, but when I'm trying to just analyze the performance of something that I would own, I find it much more helpful for the first way through to actually baseline where I'm actually at now and set some reasonable goals from there to continue to build off of. So one of the things that we talked about with doing this pre-analysis work is to actually map metrics that you want to look to towards the goals that you have for it. Because one of the things I think that happens is you're attracted to trying to get a full picture, right? You want to use as much data as you can, but that can actually obscure maybe some of the goals that you had to set beforehand, especially if you're just trying to paint a nice picture. So I put this together. I think these are the three of the most common goals that I see on maybe a specific campaign or larger, maybe for a digital strategy, for a website in general. For something like brand awareness, right, you are going to just want, the main thing is you just want to get your brand out there. You want people to see it. So the metrics that would align to it is something like page views, impressions, branded keywords. You want to see how people are searching for it as you introduce a term into the marketplace. But then with something like lead gen, you're actually trying to figure out how many people that you sent marketing material to actually used it right then to give either contact info for you, to contact you, something like that, an actual conversion. And then anything beyond that is what were some of the areas where that prevented a conversion from happening, right? Bounce rate, exit percentage, those are opportunities that were missed in the path to a conversion. And then for engagement, this is much more when we're talking about content itself. You know, what we want is for people, we wrote something, we want people to actually read it, right? So we're looking at how long they were there, were they scrolling the page to the end, right? 90% would be just above the footer. How many people read the whole thing or just read a meaningful amount and then left? What percentage of that could we convert into meaningful traffic? and then shares, right? They actually thought it was interesting enough to introduce it to their colleagues, to their friends. I think this is really helpful because often when I see other people analyze, if they would be looking at something whose goal was to just make sure that people are engaging with their content, but they would actually be looking at all of these, and it can obscure it. You really want to create a hierarchy here, and these would be the main focus to say, like, are we actually accomplishing our goal of content engagement? And in order to answer that question, you need to have said beforehand, our goal was engagement here, or our goal is to get leads, and figure out then where there's a mismatch in your in how it performed versus how you perceived it to perform. What were some of the reasons around it? But there's another part of it too, right? So how do I know I'm collecting the right data? Which, in talking about mapping things, those are pretty common analytics that you'll just have available to you. But you're not always actually going to have things neatly measured for you. So one thing that I like to do after setting the goals, trying to map specific metrics to the goals that are available, is also find the gaps, right? What are some of the answers that I want that I don't actually have a way of measuring right now? And the good news is there's a lot of really great tools available to do this cheaply. I use Google Tag Manager a lot. It's a free tool, but that doesn't mean the effort to implement it is always free. But it allows really quick and easy event tagging so that if you want to measure something like what users are doing on the page, right, not just that they've arrived, but things that they clicked, you can use a developer. This is, if you're a little bit more technical, I'm not a developer, but it's something that I use every day. You can figure out how to do it without needing to actually dive into code or do deployments. It's really just kind of knowing what's on the page. So there are tools available to figure this stuff out, but you have to identify it beforehand, and this is why you want to do this before you start the analysis, before something launches, because if you're just trying to answer the questions at the end, you're going to be set with trying to use maybe incomplete data. This next one is very common. This question came in, it just said ROI. It's probably one of the most asked about terms in general, biggest questions to me. And I think one of the things that happens a lot is, this is a driver of business in general, not just marketing. People want to know that when they put money towards something that they're going to be getting more back. But its application into marketing can be customized and unique, right? And a lot of the tools have picked up on that. It's such a conversation starter. It's such a big area of need that they're making promises that they might not be able to answer wholly. So you might be asking, like, why did I put this in the definition phase and not in the reporting phase? To me, the entire process of answering the question of what's my return on investment all starts with defining, the three parts of the acronym, right? What do you actually consider your return? Because it might be easy to jump to that it's actually going to be a dollar amount, but that might not always be the case. You can think about the example earlier with brand awareness. For that, it's going to be really hard to map brand awareness, which is something that you're not actually asking anything immediately of the people that you're introducing to your brand, to then it going to becoming a business lead, to actually being signed, to becoming revenue down the line. With something like inbound or actually looking for conversions, you might actually have a more solid pathway to when you were introduced to them to when they converted to becoming a marketing lead and so on into actual revenue. But each step along the line, you're actually going to have to define how much credit you're giving to marketing. So basically my answer to how can you quickly do ROI is that's actually not going to happen. But there's great steps that you can start out with, which is define for your marketing strategy how you're actually going to measure return. If it's actually going to be a dollar amount, you actually need to start moving toward the bottom and defining what your investments are, right? What are you putting your money towards? And with each of those activities that you're putting it towards, what are you defining a successful return for each of those? And you need to build your way up from the bottom. There's this graphic next to you. I got it from Sam Melnick, who I saw give a presentation on this, that he's using the idea of the hierarchy of needs for measurement. But at the very bottom, you need to commit most of your time and most of your needs to your core investments, mapping them out, and then moving them up to the tactical results for each of those. until eventually you can get to business impact. But the main amount of your energy, all your starting power, should be in this core investments area and moving toward tactical results. So, in summary, the 3 steps to make sure you're collecting what you need, right? The first one's the most important. If you just define what you want, you're going to have such an easier time when you actually move to the analysis one. It really sets your mindset for what you're looking for and prevents you from being overwhelmed as we go through analysis. The next is just setting goals and hypotheses and just feel like you can do complete guesses, and that's okay. It's going to pay off later. Now, the third one is probably the most difficult, but review your current measurement setup, map your questions to what you can use to answer it, and try and look up tools, do some research on how you can fill those gaps. All right, so next we're going to move into the analyze phase. So when I'm considering analyzing, this is when something launched, we're actually diving into the numbers. This is the phase that a lot of people start with first and immediately jump into that, oh man, what do I use? What should I be paying attention to? And then eventually, can someone else do this for me? So the first part of this is, this is where you'll start to see the benefits right away, is, you know, something like Google Analytics, something like that improved. There's many ways to cut apart what the performance of a page was. So to prevent that feeling of like, oh, what did I sign up for? How long is this going to take me? This is where you just go straight to the questions that you asked beforehand. Answer those first. And if you feel like you don't have a complete view, you have a much better starting point than if you were just like, how great am I performing? It's a lot harder to answer that question before you define it. So here's some of the questions that we actually had. Do you have any recommendations for analytics tools that collect data on the website? I'm going to start off in a somewhat boring way, but I'm going to try and answer it in a more interesting way. Because here's the reality. It's very difficult to jump from tool to tool to tool and get each niche piece of data that is interesting that someone else provided. For me, I use Google Tag Manager to help me measure things that I can't measure. I use Google Analytics where I can because it just has so much, it collects so much and it allows collection into it so much easier than others. It does like 90% of the job that I need most of the time. It doesn't mean it's the only thing I use, but I do try and stick to one analysis system that's going to do as much for me as I can without jumping out of it. And then I usually export all of it into Excel. It's boring, but you'll realize when you're trying to answer your own questions that you need a lot more power than just a clean report that came out of the box. I shouldn't say power. I should say, like, you need to customize it a lot. But that doesn't mean that that's all I use. You know, spreadsheets are probably the most boring thing that you could mention, which I didn't even show on the webinar. These are some of the tools that I kind of break apart. You know, that was mostly web analytics, and I try to bring everything I can into web analytics when we're talking about digital. I often look at websites, right? But here are some that I run into that I like, and I'll just do this quickly. But Sprout Social, Hootsuite, these are both paid, or there's paid versions of Hootsuite. For the clients that I work with, it does pretty much most of the job just to have the monitoring in one place, the ability to measure campaigns, clean interfaces, easy to use, easy to present the data to others. LinkedIn is used more than any other social tool, probably for the clients that we work with, for you yourselves, and it's, to me, the one native bit of analytics that I find myself needing to actually go into LinkedIn more often than use the ones that pull out its analytics. And then Google Analytics for social might surprise you, but so often one of the goals of the social campaigns is to get people to the site. So I actually end up using it more to see what happens once they arrive. Some cool tools, UX and user behavior. So one of the things that web analytics struggles with is when we're trying to figure out if we're creating the right pathways on the website, right? If we're trying to create an optimal user experience where people don't get lost, just looking at the outcomes of whether they clicked on something doesn't tell the whole story of whether they were confused, whether it could have been better. And one thing I really like about a tool like Lucky Orange is it actually, and Crazy Egg too, is these are, you know, things that do interactive heat maps, right? You can actually see where people are most commonly going. Lucky Orange specifically records every user interaction on your site, so you can actually see individual user sessions. It's hard to do that on an aggregate view, but if you have a specific UX question, you can set up a goal or a campaign and view what consistently people are doing. If they're struggling to move through your navigation, it's a great tool. And then marketing automation, HubSpot Analytics, and things like Marketo, they're just, again, I put the paid, right? You're probably using them. HubSpot has free analytics, but the benefit is they just have so much more visibility through the entire marketing system when you have it set up, right? Through social, through landing pages, through email, through the website itself. It's the one that gives a much more complete view of the customer, but it's something we'll need to go in for specific things, and I like to try and keep things centralized as much as possible.
I think something that I learned also as I have been going through this process is that you're going to have these marketing tools that you use for specific projects or like every once in a while. For instance, we use Eventbrite for our webinar registration. And if you go on the back end of Eventbrite, there's actually some analytics tools and reporting through the program, right? And so that'll exist almost in every single marketing technology. I strongly suggest familiarizing yourself with whatever tool they have available, because there's going to be seemingly random aspects to that specific reporting that you might not be able to pull through those other tools. For instance, Eventbrite has tracking links, and so we can break up the source of a registration through these specific tracking links that are sent out to our account team to use, to our business development team, breaking it up through social, and it actually ends up being something that's very easy to export and pull into the bigger picture, because I'm not saying that it's going to happen every time or every single tool you need to be an expert in, but knowing what's available will be helpful to you as you're working through the data you end up finding most important for specific activities.
Yep. Excel is going to become part of your life. So this next one was how do the free analytics tools compare to the paid? What I resisted doing, because I don't find these infographics that informative, is I could have showed one of those crazy images of the MarTech ecosystem currently with thousands upon thousands of different tools that are available to marketers, right? There are hundreds of tools I could probably ask you that maybe you're using now that I may have never heard of and run across. But here's kind of the breakdown that I see it as I've run into it. For web analytics, there's a very high threshold that you need to hit in order to get to that paid level. You need to be mapping things across multiple different systems, have very unique dimensions and questions to customer and user behavior that Google Analytics or something is not allowing you to use. And there's also even things like that are probably coming through your CRM, which might be able, your actual website tool, your CMS, that might be tracking things anyways that you wouldn't need to get an additional analytics tool for. However, when you get into social analytics tools, website management, which is something I think about for like Site Improve when you're looking at SEO accessibility, you're going to be in that paid territory fairly quickly. And the difference really is with web analytics, when you jump into the paid tools, if it's cheaper, you're paying a lot more to implement it. If it's more expensive, you're paying a lot to implement it and use it. With social analytics and website management, you're not paying a lot to implement it, and they're a lot cheaper and offer a variety of things. I'm not even going to pull out the specific tools that you could use here. We kind of walked through it before, but they're much more available, but so many of them have a different angle that might be specific to you. It's really going to depend on what you're doing in your activities. Reporting we'll actually jump on at the end when we get to that phase, but really, to me, the key to paying for reporting is when you're trying to automate it. If you're just doing one-off reports consistently and that works for you, you can probably stick with the Office tools that you already have. The prettiness is available through free tools, but not if you want to consistently automate it. This next one is, the heart of the difficulty all the time. Do you ever struggle with uncovering the meaningful metrics that reaffirm or contradict the direction of your digital strategy? It's a very good question. I can't really relate to it. I never had the struggle, but I hear that marketers do.
That was him joking.
Yeah, that's me joking. There's no laugh track that we added. There's one part of this where I just want to say, goal setting ahead of time defining questions ahead of time help with this so much more because you didn't start off with a loose goal of just did things perform well, right? You set ahead of time what you're going to look for. When you found it, you'll at least have that baseline of, okay, I generally know how it is. But what you might be looking for is that big missing piece of like, oh, wow, we should really focus on this. Focus on something like organic search is really converting a lot, right? We should really focus on that. And that doesn't always happen, apparently. But here are the ways that I kind of deal with this and what I try and look for. One, these all actually deal with context, all right? So work with percentages and not just total numbers. They're often going to be fairly low, especially if you're dealing with a specific page on the website, maybe a specific email campaign. What does it mean to you to say that 12 people converted? Can you really put that in context of your greater marketing? Maybe not, but that's why I always just say, if we're looking at how many people clicked a button, it's how many people clicked a button compared to how many people got to the page, right? And just deal with that, because it's harder to say, oh, I want to go from 12 to 20, but it's easier to say, like, okay, I want to try and improve this by 2% each time. That's that incremental guidance that the data can provide for you to give you that feedback loop and prevent you from just really setting arbitrary goals. Like the main goal is to consistently improve, and you're going to need percentages to do that because the raw numbers can be very difficult to put in context. The next is to dive into user segments. You're defaulted into all traffic mode most of the time, but you should really think about the specific audience you were trying to target. This is easier, obviously, if we're talking about a specific email campaign, but when you're looking at something like the website, look at how did mobile specifically do? How did organic search do it? Break apart into smaller ones and see maybe if there's a surprising group that was more effective at trying to do it. And you can do this really cool ways through Google Analytics. It allows you to even say, like, show me the groups that hit our contact page and where else they looked, right? Find fun, creative ways. This is the great place where you can be creative. Find fun, creative ways to break apart your audience to see if there's any group that you might not have imagined beforehand that has a really special bond. Has a lot more interest and is a lot more effective at driving some of your goals. And then lastly, compare previous numbers to previous periods when you can. That's not always available, but right, if you're in March compared to the March the year previous, the reason why I'm saying this is if you put your entire year's data for like 2017 and compared it to 2016 and compared it to 2015, you're going to notice some very consistent and natural ebbs and flows, which might obscure how you performed when you just look at the month previous, right? If you're in December, which is often heavy holiday season, it's January too, you might think, man, we didn't really do that well, when really it's just an effect of when you ran it, although I guess you could say you shouldn't have ran it in December. But be wary of whether things are doing well just because of the natural flow of the year or because it's actually meaningfully good or bad.
I think to piggyback off of looking at your year in a whole, and also, as Ben was talking, creating this kind of analytics report in context, it's important to keep track of when you have big marketing initiatives going on throughout the year. So, for instance, if you have a big event that's coming up, for instance, we go to LMA every year, sometimes this can really affect how our web traffic is. So knowing that that specific event might affect some analytics is good to mark on that calendar and be able to associate with some of those numbers you're showing. Another one might be, for instance, we put out an annual research report to our website, and so that has an effect on how many people are interacting with our content, how our social is doing, because we're investing time and money into that specific campaign, but it also ends up affecting the bigger picture. So if you're able to mark out those kind of milestone events throughout the year, that'll also help you kind of understand those ebbs and flows as you go.
All right, so the way that we're addressing this reporting way, right, is we're actually looking at it when you actually need to get these numbers to others, but I'll address a little bit on the best ways that I like to do reporting as well. So when it's time to present the data, the main thing that I keep in mind is actually, like, you can really highlight this one. Who is your audience? I feel like when I talk to my clients a lot, when they're asking me questions, the same question that they ask me actually has 3 different audiences that they're thinking about. And it's important that you actually address each of those in your reporting. So, I mean, this probably makes the most sense, but if you're reporting up to higher level people, you should not be showing as much of your work. You should have a story that they can follow. You should have the high level points, and you should bring in the data that supports those points. You shouldn't be showing an entire spreadsheet of everything that you did, exciting as it may be that you were able to map those together. And then this is really important, I would say, if you're trying to do something ongoing. But I always recommend, I recommended to Olivia, that you document your process as you begin reporting. And this means, like, if you found a metric or an analysis point that you think is really interesting, you pull it out. Remember to actually take down what audience segment you were looking at, what metrics you used, because you might want to consistently pull that report. It might be something you want to pull every month now. And then prioritize reports for automation. Even though I said with an audience like executives or something like that, where you're going to try and make it a simple story that's supported by data, but not have a presentation that is totally data, there might be people there that actually like to dive in. And so if you can identify the reports that are going to be interesting to people consistently, prioritize those for automation. And I mean prioritize seriously. Automating them can be difficult, so you really need to look for a select few that address that issue. So this is kind of my suggestion for, again, if you just are doing one-time reporting, you have a presentation coming up, you're not going to need this again, I don't recommend spending a bunch of money for a reporting tool. You probably have enough design tools there to do what you need. Excels are not that nice looking, but they do the job. InDesigns are very nice looking, but I never know how to use them. And then things like Google Analytics, heat maps. Heat maps are great, right? Like, they're difficult for me to always make big conclusions from. But if I have enough outside data to say that this is a good conclusion, they communicate so much better to outside audiences. Like, we're struggling here, and look, it's a big blue zone when I look at the heat map. Like, that tells a great story. So think about when a number works versus when actually putting a visualization is going to work as you're doing the reporting. The paid tools, I really love Tableau. It's expensive. Power BI is very free when you have a Microsoft Office, and very free is helpful. And both of those allow a lot more automation. I'm going to bring in Google Sheets here. I'm sorry for using Google Analytics all the time, but one thing that's helpful with Google Sheets is it has a plugin that goes in seamlessly from Google Analytics and can allow you to use Excel functionality to make built-in dashboards, right? So that's something that anyone can access since it's hosted in the cloud, and you can use for reporting if it makes sense. But these others are much more powerful tools. I'm talking about Tableau, Power BI, Domo, much more powerful, much cooler, much more impressive visually. So if this is something where you're making headway and you think it's worth the investment, I love working with all of them. It's just a specific use case we need to bring them in.
So Ben's tools are all well and good, but sometimes the reality is we have to make PowerPoint decks. I'm going to talk about kind of how our process was, because this is our first time. This is our first time bringing this report out to the company, and so there was a lot of lessons learned, and I think that talking through kind of my process as I sent that report out might be helpful to you guys. So like I said, our formats, yes, Excel is very important. This is actually the tool you use to collect and save literally all of the data. As Ben said, you have to really think about your audiences and who you're presenting to. Just like you wouldn't send the same ad to every single audience, you want to segment the content you're sending out. Excel is really for the marketing team. It's for us to go back and reference and use quarter to quarter, and to find and pull insights that can help us make more strategic decisions as we go. I ended up using a PowerPoint deck. This is different for everyone. I think InDesign or creating infographics are also really great options. Our team uses decks a lot, so creating a PowerPoint was actually totally very realistic for the amount of time we had, and we were able to make it visually compelling, all things considered, really. And so our audiences, I considered 3 audiences when rolling this out. Our marketing team itself, so I did the initial presentation with the PowerPoint to go through and kind of get us all on the same page in terms of what that narrative we identified was, so that if anyone was asked a question, we would all feel relatively confident talking through the insights we had. Then it was sending it up to leadership. This was a reduced version of that deck, more visual, still focused on the narrative, that they could use to talk to possibly their stakeholders or help them feel like they understand what the marketing team does, and again, get that kind of internal buy-in that we need to continue moving forward with new initiatives or initiatives that we're adjusting because of the data we're doing or using. Lastly, and this isn't necessarily a great fit for every group, but I think it's really important to consider, is rolling it out to all of your company or a larger segment of the company. I actually ended up doing a lunch and learn, a quick 30 minutes, just talking through very high level some of the insights we had as well as the process, just so, again, the company kind of knew what activities we've been participating in as well as how we're trying to learn from those activities. I actually got some really interesting feedback from those. It ended up, something that was unexpected that happened was when I went through kind of registration, for instance, of a webinar, I broke out, I mentioned before, we used tracking links to see where those sources were coming from. The account teams and business development teams actually got a little competitive, and it lit a fire under their buns to see who could get more registrations, and it made them more excited to be involved in marketing activities and to want to help us help them spread the word on the content we're producing. The other thing, a big part of our narrative is that one of our big value adds to clients and our peers is really that we are able to share ideas and teach people about digital. We're really the experts in that, and so being able to prove that our content has valuable actually made a couple of subject matter experts who have spoken here and there, written a blog once or twice, came up to me and said, hey, I'm excited about X, Y, and Z topics. I would love to write a blog. How can I get involved? And this is something that was new. Like, they had never really shown that level of initiative, and after seeing the data and seeing how it makes a difference for our business, they got really excited about it. And so this was, again, it's not always going to be your entire company that needs to see this content, but if you can identify groups that could really be motivated by seeing that data or seeing how our initiatives are making a difference, then they actually might end up being helping hands for you. Lastly, I wanted to quickly talk through our timing. As I said before, we wanted to do a quarterly rollout, so reviewing the quarter and what activities were going on. I think we'll also, for our yearly summary, which is supposed to be Q4, I think we'll look at it a little differently and actually put into context over the year how those things changed, which quarters really did the best, to give that big picture view that I think the end of the year report really should give. This is something that we're still kind of figuring out, and again, this might not fit for everyone, but I think it's important to consider monthly dashboards for leadership. And again, I wouldn't do this for all of your content. I think it's important to consider basically initiatives that will change considerably or could have the opportunity to change considerably month to month. And when I say that, I mean if social media is a big part of your strategy and you're seeing big increases or decreases or engagement that's making a considerable difference, being able to report on that monthly will actually show how you guys are moving through the process and are building out like how the improvement of that specific initiative. I think if you're doing content a lot, the opportunities for how those engagements change month to month could be helpful, just so people see what is going on with some things that are more volatile than, say, how your website is doing month to month. That might not be as necessary. So again, not necessarily perfect for everyone, but I think timing is really important. As I said before, these were kind of unexpected lessons for me. I think that we had some really great insights. One being, sharing isn't always caring. Ben said this before. You should not be sending all of your data to everyone. That doesn't need to be said again, but I think it's really important to remember. And data can empower everyone. You expect that your insights will help you and your team adjust your strategies to get better, but frankly can actually really help empower the people outside of your team within the company to be cheerleaders for you and want to help out with initiatives that make sense for them to help out with. And again, timing really matters. I think your cadence really sets up your success, because if you're sending those monthly dashboards on content that really doesn't matter, people will stop listening. They will ignore those monthly reports if you're sending too much data from week to week or month to month. So figuring out which pace makes sense and what content you're sending has relevance will make a big difference. Frankly, in the long run, when you're creating the reports and this process and this project, you want to create something that's useful to you and the company, and it's sustainable, because if you're not able to continuously use your data, create these reports, inform other people, and adjust your strategy, then it's kind of all for naught. And so that's something I really have learned to focus on and figure out how we can continually adjust and edit our projects, or our analytics projects, to be useful and sustainable in the long run. So with that, we're going to now open it up to questions. I'm just going to give a couple housekeeping reminders. If you have questions, you can submit it using the chat function located either in the lower right-hand corner of your screen or within that blue drop-down bar at the top of your screen. And I'm going to say it one more time. We always get this question. We will send out the slides and the recording of this webinar to everyone who's registered for this event in the next couple business days. We're going to take a minute to collect those questions and prep our answers, and then we'll be right back for our Q&A session. Thanks, guys.
Okay, we're back. This is Tanya. I'm going to go ahead and facilitate this Q&A because we have a nice collection of questions that have been submitted. So the first one is, how would or does removing old content directly affect SEO, particularly during a new site build? If we go through and decide to remove all content from X date backwards, does or will that have any positive or negative effects?
That's a great question. I promise I will not do this for every single question that's asked, but I'm going to say it depends. One of the things you should look for, yes, it's a helpful exercise, especially I would pull a report of recent data, within the past year of the articles that are from 5 years ago, whatever the year amount you're looking for. Look at the activity. If you're not seeing any, those are great candidates to kind of get rid of. The benefits to it is you have basically the equivalent of an allowance of when it's searching your site, and by getting rid of it, you're allowing Google or Bing or Yahoo to search your site more effectively. But those things can also be done through effective sitemaps and things like that. What you should look for some of that content, if it actually is valuable, if it would be hurtful to get rid of it. Basically, if other sites that are have a nice ranking, are considered good, are linking people into that specific page, it's not good to get rid of pages like that. So you should think about, if not specifically just keeping it around, try to recreate that same content and redirect it to a newer version to kind of take advantage of what's already being done and optimize it so maybe you get some new life out of something like that. But mainly what you need to keep in mind is it still getting activity, and are people linking into it? That's a good standard for looking. There's probably not going to be a lot that are the case, so you can identify those specific ones, try to reuse it, try to get new life out of it. But for the most part, you're going to see content that's specifically older is not particularly engaged as much, and it can be helpful if people are bouncing off it consistently to get rid of it. So that's the long and short of it. The main takeaway there look at the activity now, and if people are linking in, what those sources are, and if they're good sources, like you've heard of them, think about keeping that or redirecting it into a new page that makes sense.
Cool. This one's also kind of SEO related. Generally, do SEO rankings and web traffic notice spikes or dips directly after a launch? What should we expect there, and how can we communicate?
So I'm basically just going to focus on something that actually happens a lot through our technology team, make sure that this happens. But before going into a launch, the main focus for this should really be making sure you have a good redirect strategy. You don't want to lose all the good things that are happening to your current site when you relaunch a new one. So if you're probably going to have a new URL structure with a new website, right, you need to make sure that those all the traffic going to older URLs are going to the correct place. Some of this needs to be done manually because, you know, for something like, I don't know, a practice page, a bio, it's going to be easy to map those. But for some older content pieces, maybe some about places, you should thoughtfully think about what the one-to-one translation with the new site. So people, if you're redirecting them, that you're not just redirecting them some crazy place just to keep the redirect. You need to make sure that it was appropriate and that people aren't just going to leave the page and it'll eventually get docked for that. Those are things that I'll keep in mind. It's really hard to tell you that things go up or go down. It really depends. But one of the main things that can go poorly is bad redirect strategy causing a bunch of 404s on places that were giving you nice rankings and nice linking. So try to avoid that.
Well, the next one is, we have trouble getting buy-in from leadership on launching thoughtful marketing campaigns. Do you have any tactics to get leadership to make a decision, especially without a baseline, so nothing to refer to prior, as like an initial campaign?
I think when you're starting to think through campaigns, there's a couple things to consider. First is the tool you're using. We use HubSpot for our marketing automation, and frankly, it makes creating campaigns a lot easier than just sending emails through separate tools and then having landing pages somewhere else. So you really need to feel like your tool can empower whatever campaign you're building out. I think another thing you really need to consider is the end goal of that campaign. Is it meant to pull in brand new people? Is it supposed to engage with peers that you already really care about and have their information? This is important because it'll change how much legwork, frankly, you have to put into it. Brand new leads can cost money if you're doing Google Ads, or be kind of difficult to capture depending on, again, kind of where you rank in Google, what kind of content you're pushing out. Also, it's really important to consider how much content you actually have. If you feel like you can package content into a 3-part piece, at least to engage people over time, if you feel like you can engage someone with your content for at least a couple months, then you're probably fine. I think the best way to earn that buy-in is to build out a skeleton and what your hopes are to achieve, and start small. It's okay if you end up not getting the exact amount of leads you wanted, as long as you create this initial skeleton, because then you can argue that it's already there. The structure's there, and you're allowed to experiment more. I think it really depends on what your end goal is, what kind of personas you have. This could be its own, honestly, webinar conversation.
It's a great question. Without knowing it, like, I still like to make my business case with analytics would be looking at what you're currently doing, and why it's falling short without this new investment. You know, straddling the line with not just trashing what you're currently doing and saying this is going to solve all our problems, but say, like, we're doing well here, we're missing here, and we think that this fills that missing spot. One, it gives a well-defined success area for what this new one is supposed to accomplish that you can measure against. This is, again, why the definition page is so helpful. But without knowing what you're currently doing, I mean, I would imagine that there's something that you're performing now that illustrates what gap this new thing would fill, and I think that's where you would kind of look for the analytics from your current place. Even as you say, there's no baseline, or you know, you could just say you could trash what you're doing. That's always an option.
Okay, the next one is any thoughts on Google Data Studio as a game changer as far as digestible content and charts?
So game changer, I would have to talk to you individually. Like, it's a great tool. It's expensive. It has the benefit of, if you use Google Analytics a lot, it's more advanced, right? So especially for things like multi-attribution formulas and things like that, if you're doing that, you're going to start moving into that Google Studio territory. I think one thing to keep in mind is if you're looking into Google Studio, you are looking at a place that has legitimate competition, and you can look around. I mean, it's great. I've never actually been able to use the reporting functionality. I've been able to use its advanced analytics functionality. There's a great benefit to having in one system, right, where you're just reporting with the data that you have. But I would just say that at that point, you're in an area that has much more competition in terms of pricing and features. So it's hard for me to say that it's a game changer. It is a natural extension that Google probably should have done. The only thing that I would say is it has made me nervous that Google has randomly, without much notice, killed programs like its custom search engine and kind of left people in a lurch. So I don't think they're going to get rid of Google Analytics, but with something like Google Studio, probably, you know, it's a big company and it'll stay around, but stuff like that recently has really given me pause.
The next question is, how hard is it to integrate your website data with marketing automation data or your CRM?
Well, like I said, we use HubSpot and Salesforce, and we also have Keystone, but this kind of depends for us, Salesforce and HubSpot. It depends on your subscriptions and how many contacts you have in HubSpot. We needed a developer, and so it took a minute to get it all turned on, and we had bugs that we had to work through. So it took some labor of love, but frankly, HubSpot's pretty much set up to be like very helpful. If you put a ticket in, someone will respond, like a real person will respond within 24 hours, if not much sooner than that. And so when we ran into technology issues, HubSpot was able to help. We're lucky to have some developers. We didn't have that resource readily available all of the time because they're working on client websites, which is more important, clearly. But it's worth it, I think, because we're working on this kind of culture of being able to help business development and enable that team to do their best. Having our marketing events and insights plug right into Salesforce, I think has made a big difference for the insights they get when they're prospecting. But, you know, I think it takes some amount of work. It's not a switch on. I mean,
the clear-eyed view of what would be about to happen if you're about to do it is you're going to need to do a lot of data cleanup, like a lot of data cleanup. You do not want to push a bunch of garbage contacts into a new system, which the optimist view is that's a great opportunity to clean out your data and make sure you have a correct and actionable data set. But from the marketing team's point of view, that's a ton of work. From the tech team's point of view, you know, these things are getting better, but this is a project to do. I think it's totally worth it. You get a total view of your customer across its different systems. You can identify specific people and how they're doing it, GDPR included. So just keep it in mind. You're going to need to do a lot of data cleanup, and you're going to need to work across teams pretty well too.
But I think it highlights a really interesting piece of why we do this too. I think in addition to proving what marketing does or, you know, learning about how we can improve, we're also learning about the behaviors of our clients, our prospects, all of our different audiences that we're able to report back to the business, and then they can then use that information to further enhance the customer experience. So I think integrating the systems is an easier way to get that information instantly to the right people. But, you know, pulling it into your report in the meantime can be a way of accomplishing that as well.
Yeah, I think integrating your systems makes digital as a whole much more understandable to the different groups in the company than when it's just a separate website and we're talking about anonymous users, things like that.
Well, no more questions came in, but if anybody has any additional questions, you can send them to marketing@onenorth.com and we can pass them along to Ben. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.